Geology. Geology? And geology again. This is Daniel Minizini, your inquisitive geologist from KPFT HD2 channel. Welcome everybody from Texas, United States, around the world, and up there in the International Space Station where the astronauts are probably listening to us, thanks to the brotherhood we have with NASA here in Houston. And today we have with us B.Romans. Brian is an associate professor of sedimentary geosciences at the Virginia Tech. He is a distinguished lecturer for the IODP, the International Ocean Discovery Program, in the 2018 and 2019 year. He has been awarded for excellence in sedimentary geology in 2014 by the SEPM, the Society for Sedimentary Geology. And welcome with us, dear Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Daniel. I'm happy to be here.
Brian, are you really happy to be here?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. We've been talking about doing it for I don't know how long now.
So, Brian, tell me nowadays, what makes you happy?
What makes me happy? I guess, I love interacting with my students and my coworkers here. I really do love this job. So, the summer was great because sometimes the summer, grad students go off and do internships or go do things. But the 3 students I have right now, we're all around, not every day, but most of the summer. So there was a lot of interaction on their research projects, and it was a lot of fun. That makes me happy.
So you're really happy with your profession, Brian. That is something that I really like about you. You have seen that you are really fully satisfied about that. Am I wrong about it?
No, you're not wrong. I definitely am. I feel really fortunate, privileged about that I was able to, get into a job and a position that really fits and that I really like. I mean, it's like anything. Not every single moment, every single day is great, right? There's challenges and, things that are really hard to deal with, but I just try to look overall. It's definitely a very satisfying.
So because of this position that you have, and we all feel that you are very lucky because you propagate your passion through several means, the blogs that you write, the lectures that you give, the tweets that you send. And I'd like to uncover this mindset that you have and emphasizing your emotions in those key moments where you develop your ideas, both professional ideas and also existential thoughts. I think that this human side is what I would like to grasp from this interview. And actually, let's start from this. What has been one of the most important geological ideas you have developed?
Yeah, okay. So I guess first I'd like to say, like any, science is very collaborative, right? So we're all, as they say, standing on the shoulders of people who came before us. And, I don't know if are there any ideas that are really truly original, right? Like we talk to people, we read papers, we see talks at conferences, and all that kind of seeps in and kind of forms our ideas. So I just want to preface, right, that, things that I'm interested in or that I hope or think maybe I can play a role in advancing aren't really new necessarily, right? And so the one that comes to mind that I've been interested in most the last, 5, 6, 7 years, for sure, I guess you could encapsulate with the sort of buzz phrase, source to sink, right? And so that's this idea, like a phrase like farm to table or nose to tail or, other cradle to grave, these kind of buzz phrase that is meant to communicate something about the entire system, right? The entire entity of what it is you're interested in. And so thinking of sedimentary systems in this kind of holistic way, this source to sink way. So, you can look back at even Hutton and Lyell and statements made way back when thinking like that. And then maybe we got away from that as we specialized more. And so I think in the last 10 years, maybe 15 years, there's been some resurgence with thinking of the whole system again, right? And that sediment comes from somewhere, and it's not just what it's made of and provenance, which we can link back to the 1960s and 70s, but also just thinking of this entire system. And so I guess to answer your question, that would be one kind of avenue that I've been active in trying to advance in some way with research and writing.
So let's analyze that a little bit more. I'm interested in describing the process that brought you there to decide to devote part of your life and most of the hours of your day to studying the so-called source to sink, because you start talking about the giants, Hutton and Lyell, and so it seems that you gave it a deep breath before deciding to jump into this topic. How did it happen that you cherry-picked this one?
That's a good question. I hadn't really kind of looked back like that. I mean, I guess thinking back to sort of my own education, you take courses and things are very compartmentalized, right? There's this topic and that topic. And at least when I did this, 20 years ago now, a little more, maybe we do it better now, I hope. It kind of guides my teaching. It wasn't sort of all stitched together and sort of the Earth system's kind of philosophy or approach. At least I didn't, or if it was, I didn't really get it at the time. And then, I through my master's was focused on deep marine depositional, systems, turbidites, and really, got into field work and some of the technical aspects. But I guess it wasn't until then my PhD with Steve Graham at Stanford. And so Steve Graham's advisor was Bill Dickinson, back in the 70s, early 80s. And Steve has this mindset of, and he could talk about it much more eloquently than I can.
What was the kind of mindset of Steve Graham?
Of thinking of the big picture, I guess, is the way I'd put it for Steve. Is
how big it was the big picture of Steve Graham?
Would be, as you're out in the field in California, it's remembering, what plate you're on, right? So sort of that kind of big picture. And thinking about, the drainage system for this, these sedimentary rocks we're looking at cropping out here from, 50, 60, 70 million years ago, that drainage system, extended so many hundreds or 1,000 kilometers, and really painting the picture of that snapshot of not just, the processes that led to that deposit in front of you that you can touch and you can look at and measure, but that's now since long gone, right, that we want to reconstruct. And so Steve, I guess, was pretty instrumental.
Steve was
a
senior professor once he gave you this legacy.
He was. I mean, he started as faculty in the early 80s. I don't remember the exact year, maybe 82 or 83, and obviously, I didn't interact with him until the early mid 2000s. So yeah, he was senior, faculty by then. But from everything I know, from talking to other people, he's always had this kind of mindset. And maybe he got it, from
Dickinson,
from Dickinson and his classmates at the time, and so kind of passed on down that way. So mentors obviously important, Steve, and then also during my PhD, I had the joy opportunity to interact with Bill Normark, who's since passed away. He was worked at the USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, in Menlo Park, not far from Stanford there, and served on committees of students. And Bill was, as he said, he was a fan of fans, submarine fans, and So, he wrote a paper in 1970 looking at what we would now look at this bathymetry data as really crude and coarse scale, and came up with these conceptual models and ideas. When I interacted with him for a project as part of my PhD, looking at the modern, sort of the last few millennia of deposition in submarine fans offshore Southern California, and Bill also had that sort of systems viewpoint of, we should look up into the catchment. We can see it, right? This is young enough geologically. Everything's still there and connected, and we can learn about it. So he pushed me, nudged me towards some of that direction as well. So, yeah, I guess, it comes down to influential people that.
And I see that these influential people that you mentioned, Bill Dickinson, Steve Graham, and Bill Normark, they were senior. That is why I said before this adjective senior, in the sense that they were mature geologists, that they had seen a lot of geology, they did a lot of field campaigns, and you probably met them when they were mature enough to synthesize their thoughts, the geological thoughts, to something very clear, which in their case was this source to sinks, or holistic view of a grain of sediment that moves from the source to the very last place where it sinks. And noticing that, I would like to discuss with you about the issue of geologists, that they need to be senior, old, in order to have this vision. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's interesting. But, yeah, so I think in part you're right that, yes, I interacted with these mentors when they were, more senior in their career, more experience, and they were able to articulate some of these ideas. And I would say not only that, being able to articulate it or sort of talk about it, but also being good mentors in the sense that allowing me and some of my classmates at the time to explore an idea or direction that, when you're more novice, we'll say, less experienced, you get really excited about, and then you realize, somebody wrote a paper about this 30 years ago or 40 years ago. But maybe there's a little twist, right, that is kind of a little spin that you have on it. And I think good mentors don't just say, so-and-so thought of that, but kind of let the scientist, the less experienced scientists go down, that path to explore and maybe hopefully discover a little bit on their own. And so that feeling, right, of discovery, even if somebody had already sort of came up with the idea and wrote about it or talked about it many, many years ago or decades ago or longer, when you yourself have it, right, it's still really meaningful, right? And so that can get you kind of hooked on that. And so I think, good mentors sort of try to cultivate that kind of atmosphere. And I say Steve and Bill Normark were quite good at that in different ways. But if I think back, they both, I had that experience with them. So I don't know, to get to your question, do you need to be old or more senior? I don't know. Maybe it's sort of a frame of mind that we can get to quicker or in a sense, but maybe it does take some time to marinate and mature. I don't know. It's a good question. I don't have a good answer for you right now.
Yeah, well, if we need time, if the parameter is time, maybe time, you cannot compress time. It's just a matter of fact that we geoscientists, we need the time to accumulate experience and data in our brain in order to let bloom ideas that they are more holistic and less specific of subdisciplines. On the other side, I could ask you, do you know anybody that is young, a youngster, that has that kind of view? You see a lot of students, you see a lot of young people, you see your peers, and which is a generation after these mentors. Do you see in them the same light that you are describing now about Dickinson Graham and Normark?
Well, I should say first, I never got to interact with Bill Dickinson. I only met him once, so I can only go on what I've heard about him. But yeah, let's see. That's a really good question. I mean, I can't really think off the top of my head of specific individuals right now, but now it makes me want to pay attention to what you just asked, and
especially because you have the means to change this. I mean, if you recognize that we have a problem in geology because we dedicate special awards, you yourself, you got an award because you were young, because kind of the community thinks that you cannot compete with the others, the senior, the experts. And so you have the means, you are in a university, you have a lot of students, you interact with them. And if the parameter is time and we cannot compress it, there's nothing we can do. But maybe, if the parameter is another one, like exposure to data, exposure to field campaigns, more collaboration, then we can work on that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, sort of the process. I mean, I guess I would say that of all the students I interact with, it's PhD students, and that again comes back to your point, maybe the time, where over 4 or 5 plus years, I've seen the most kind of evolution, right? And maybe it does have something to do with time, but it doesn't need to take 20, 25, or 30 years. But there's there's more time in a 4 or 5 year PhD to explore a bit. So maybe it's the notion of being able to explore and go down pathways that the individual seeks out and then realizes that's a blind alley, as they say. I need to try something else. And master's students, in 2 years, there's just not enough time to sort of, sometimes, I wouldn't say never, but in general, not as much opportunity to do that with the classes have to be, completed and the project. And then into undergraduate, right? We do our best to offer research experiences, and like I'm having an undergrad, work in our lab this fall. But they're so busy, right? He's going to have one hour a week, right, for the semester to devote to it. So just getting a taste of it. And so it partly is about time, I guess, that there's a little time to stretch out and wander sort of intellectually.
Yeah, and we could engineer something in here, because also like plants, they need time. No, plants, they need time, the seasons, etc. But we engineer a way to allow plants to grow faster. So maybe we can do the same to allow geoscientists to mature faster. And why do we need that? Well, because once you have a mature geoscientist, that person has an holistic view and can really understand where it is important to focus the little time that he has. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess another thought popped in my head as you were saying that is, well, I think having some geoscientists, when they sort of come out of education and get ready to go into industry or government or academia, wherever they end up, having that kind of big picture mindset would be good, but I guess the question is, does everybody need to, right? Having those who are really focused on a specialty and advancing that specialty. Like, so for me, I've, been told and sometimes even worried that I was doing too many different kinds of things and not doing any of them really well, potentially, right? Sort of the mile wide, inch deep problem. But I just like that, right, because I enjoy that. But some scientists, maybe the science, the endeavor needs that mix of different kinds of scientists, some that really drill down into specifics of maybe a methodology, right, to advance the technology and push the envelope on that. And if we were all kind of the same, maybe that wouldn't be good. I don't know.
And we will talk about that because you have been so lucky to have the experience of working in research, not only in academia, but also in industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to go through that with you later. But before, I would like to touch on the existential thoughts, because that is what I'm trying to grasp from your mindset, not just the professional ideas, but also the existential thoughts. So you as a free agent, what do you feel responsible for? You're a professor at Virginia Tech. You have a lot of students in front of you. Where do you feel your profession adds value to society at large?
Yeah, so I think as a teacher, sort of educator, and I include in that sort of mentor, like a research mentor, right, an advisor. You use this word advisor. I'd say, it's the contact with these people, right? Actual, in real life, sort of human interaction, right? I think that is from the point of view of being, a PhD sort of primary advisor, like working closely with somebody through that journey, to students that are in a class that I teach that maybe I don't get to know as well or very well, but there's still interaction there, and so I would hope that that's where I have some kind of role or some sort of impact. Now that might not be a lot of people in an absolute number sense, right? But I think that that contact and that relationship is pretty important.
Do you think that the students, they realize how important it is for you this?
I don't know. Maybe.
Do you tell them?
Yeah. I mean, I maybe haven't said it just the way I said it there, so maybe I should, but in other ways, right? I try to set the tone on the first day of classes about, how it's sort of a community, mutual respect, and we're kind of in this together, and that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, it's hard to read students. I try to always put myself in their shoes, which isn't always fair to do, right? Because I have my own background and perspectives and biases, right? And I try to get to know them as much as I can. So you learn a lot, and I think when it's grad students, right, because you work closely for more than a semester, right, more than just a few hours a week in the context of a course, that's obviously a much more different relationship.
So what are your main satisfactions that you have in your work?
I really still like learning new things. So, I get some joy out of that, and I guess as you progress in this, right, we get better at learning, right? We sort of know what process works for us better as we get more experience, right? And so you can be potentially more efficient at it, and you can recognize when, there's some nugget of insight that is exciting or interesting. You're like, oh, I didn't know that, or I need to think about that in the context of this other work or something. So I really like that feeling of learning new things, which I guess kind of goes back to the idea of kind of spreading myself out in a way to, I'm interested in, I don't know, cosmogenic radionuclides. That's an interesting tool. I'm gonna learn about that and come up with a project for that. And then, paleoceanography, that's interesting, or, whatever, and sort of explore these different avenues, but trying to keep the hub or the foundation of my expertise and not going too far afield.
What about something more trivial, like the satisfaction of seeing your ideas published in a paper?
Oh, yeah, of course. I love that. I'll admit that. I mean, that's super fun, right? When that paper comes out, so after doing this now for, a decade or so of writing, submitting, revising, publishing papers. These are hard fought things, right? You know, can take a year, two, maybe 2.5 years, sometimes depending all the circumstances. And yeah, so when a paper, especially one obviously where I had a really significant role or the primary role, I definitely get excited and proud of that.
Yeah, and I bet also
tell everybody on Twitter, right?
Yes.
And I don't think some people are like, well, there's all this bragging on Twitter from academics or scientists, and I would just say brag away. Like, I want to hear about all the stuff, right? So I think that's okay.
Yeah, and then since you mentioned how important your students are for you, I bet that seeing your students graduating, that should be also another great satisfaction.
Absolutely. And then now as time goes on, hearing from them what they're doing and where they are in their work and in their life as well.
Where did you end up your students? They work in private companies, they remain in university, in industry, or what do they do?
It's a mix. Right now, the majority are in petroleum industry. I do have one former PhD student who's an assistant professor now. And, yeah, I think another one, she did a master's with me. She's now doing a PhD in geomorphology, slightly different field.
Where would you like your students to go? Like, if I had a student, I would like him to be like Nobel Award, the best science in the world. Well, so I would like it to remain in academia. But I don't know. Maybe some professors, they like to be more pragmatic and say, no, the most important thing is to find a job for them, and so they should go definitely to industry.
Yeah, I mean they should try to do what they want to be happy, right?
But what about you? What do you think about your students? Where would you like to place one of your students?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, if they're doing something that excites them and they're interested in, I think that's even if they end up getting out of science, that's okay, right? I guess having some former students to interact with and even collaborate with on research would be awesome. But I don't think they have to be in academia. I suppose academics, right? That's our mandate, is to do that. But there's people in industry that you can still bounce ideas off, and yeah, maybe you don't end up writing papers, so to speak, together, but there's interaction and still science being done. So I don't know. I guess I hadn't thought about that, like where they end up. I just want them to feel like they're doing something that suits them, which could totally change 5 years later or 10 years later.
Yeah, but that also depends on how you teach the classes, right? Because if you, I guess that if your students, they don't remain in science, even if they are happy with their life, you're not so satisfied. That's just an idea from my side. But the way in which you plan to teach, it probably could affect their decision. Just imagine.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I guess what I find myself saying a lot as I teach now. I've been here now since 2011, so teaching our sort of SED-Strat, one of our core classes for undergrad majors, for the 7th time, because I didn't teach it one fall. And what I find myself saying over and over again is, like, all right, here's a concept we're going to talk about today or this week. And I find myself saying the phrase, now, regardless of whether you end up in industry, academia, or government, I kind of always mention that sort of triad. Not that that's everything, right? There's nonprofits, there's other things, right? But that covers a lot. And I find myself saying, regardless of whether you end up in one of those, this is significant or important because. And so try to, I don't want them to the students to think that, going the route of academia is sort of the only path for a scientist, because it's obviously not.
I see.
But now maybe because of my time working, there's plenty of academics who have never been anywhere else besides academia, right?
Yeah, you made your time. You made your time in industry.
That's potentially, what's kind of underlying that. But I do try to, because I've seen, especially undergraduates, that, at that moment, that time, some of them are like, how is this going to help me, with getting a career and a job? And they're thinking about that, and that's a very mature, intellectually mature way to think, is, how is this going to help me? And so I appreciate when they challenge me that way.
Brian, what do you think you have more than the professors that they have been their entire life in academia? And obviously, I'm thinking about you working in industry, oil and gas industry.
I mean, I think it's a different point of view, right? So now I would say as time goes on, right, I become further away from that, right? So now being here 8 years, right, the years sort of keep ticking on, and my time of direct sort of, when I was there, gets further back, right, in the rearview mirror. Granted, I still have, people I know and interactions and with recruiters and research, but there's more separation. So taking that into account, but I can, offer some of that kind of practicality. I mean, we have I have a colleague in this department who has the title Professor of Practice, and he worked in the mining industry with the environmental kind of problems and issues related to mining as a geochemist for several years, 8 or 10 years, I can't remember, and then sort of came back. And some universities have a title like this or a different position like this, and it's meant to sort of indicate sort of somebody who's kind of been out there applying the science and is now, here teaching, mentoring.
Professor of practice.
Yeah, and I don't know how many other universities use that terminology. I've never looked that up, but it's...
I like it.
Yeah, professor of practice. So it's sort of, there's... I think as universities sort of evolve, there's different titles or roles, right? That some more leaning to more teaching and education advancement, and some, with maybe this sort of practical sort of career advisement, and some in maybe leaning more towards research, and everyone doing some combination of that, but collectively, the department can sort of, there's always somebody, students like, I'm interested in this. There's somebody around to talk to that has some insight, hopefully.
So, Brian, all in all, what is your dream as a professor at Virginia Tech, or obviously in your next step?
Yeah. I know you even told me you were going to ask this, and I still have trouble answering that.
That's maybe because you don't sleep.
Yeah. No, I definitely sleep. I sleep okay.
That's very good. Please.
My dream, one thing specific thing I would really like to do. So I've been on 2 IODP expeditions, ocean drilling program, one in 2012 and one a year and a half ago now, early 2018. And those experiences were definitely amazing, and I think changed parts of the trajectory of my career. So one thing that I would like to do, if possible, is be able to kind of be the co-leader of one of those expeditions, what they call the co-chief scientist. I think that would be, not many people get to do that, right? And so I think that to give you a specific answer to something I'd like to do, at least professionally, scientifically, that would be one of those.
What would you study with IODP, with the International Ocean Discovery Program?
So I've been using sedimentology, right? That's my background, my training, but using, I guess, I'd even say physical sedimentology, things like grain size and the classic foundational stuff to integrate that and think about that in terms of oceanographic processes, more sort of bigger scale, ocean basin scale currents, and how that relates to the climate state of the planet. So the oceans obviously are a really important component of the Earth's climate system, the atmosphere-ocean system interaction with the solid Earth. So I really liked with IODP both the expeditions in different ways of using the sedimentary record to, it's not just the carrier of, say, microfossils that have geochemical information, important geochemical information, but it's actually the sediment itself too, right? Like the sedimentology of it and how that relates to these ocean processes. So I had the opportunity to co-teach an oceanography course a couple of years ago, 2017. I'd never taken oceanography when I took college. I should have when I went to college. And so, I learned a lot co-teaching the geological and physical oceanography aspects of that course. And, I just really like that intersection of the geology, the solid Earth, right, the record, right, a core you can hold in your hands, with these basically planetary scale questions and problems. I think that connection is really interesting and satisfying. And IODP does that really well. That's kind of their whole bread and butter.
I'm intrigued by this dream of being co-chief on IODP. I've been personally on several research vessels, and altogether, probably during the years of the PhD, I've been like a couple of years on a ship doing marine geology.
Yeah, okay.
And I really understand how it could change your view, how it could change your career path, and how it could change yourself. Because I remember being on a ship, which generally the ships where I was on were way smaller than the ones of the IODP. It is really a microcosmos, and the interactions with the people, from the captain to the sailors to the colleagues, they are so intense. And whatever somebody does is affecting all the other ones. I remember the shifts, sleeping only 4 hours, and the food, the international environment that you have in such a small place, as small as a square of a little town. The readings that you have to do, because sometimes you don't have the internet, or at least when I was on those ships there was no internet. It is definitely something that everybody should experience. Yeah,
you describe it well. It is intense, right? And I've done a lot of field work, walking out on mountains and outcrops, and going to sea is really different. Obviously, you're sort of trapped, so to speak, on this vessel, and so it is intense. Some of that intensity is really exciting. Some of it can be frustrating.
Yes.
But I guess, with at least what I experienced in those two expeditions, each several weeks long or almost 2 months long, is there's ups and downs, but, that collective of scientists and then the crew, right, and the support staff and everything, makes it all happen. So I think just sort of seeing that, and maybe, having a role in at that kind of leadership level would be pretty exciting.
So that's the dream. What about the nightmare? What are your nightmares?
The nightmare. Nightmare. So I guess like professionally? Sort of.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It would affect your profession if it is not professional.
That's true. Yeah, nightmare. I guess, would be something like, I don't know, the state of Virginia, right, because we're a state university, just has, some awful, horrible budget crisis, right, and decides to cut Department of Geosciences, right? I think it's unlikely. I think it's pretty unlikely, but that, if you're asking for nightmares, that would be one, right? So just then thinking, okay, what do I do now, right? And
right.
people go through this all the time, right? I'm really lucky and fortunate, when a company, gets acquired or, merges or something, and all of a sudden they're, out the door and trying to think what's next. And so that probably wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, right? There's a lot of more worse things I can think of, but that would be, professionally, that would be tough, right? But not only my job, right, my livelihood, but just thinking of like getting rid of geosciences, like that's the choice.
Never get rid of geoscience. You are breathing geoscience, and
no, but I mean like in a university setting, right, where
I see
those departments either get consumed by another department or sort of changed, and from a professional point of view, that would be sort of nightmarish, right? Like, so now what do we do, right? Sort of trying to build this and contribute to building a department and with a certain kind of curriculum and culture and everything, and then all of a sudden it's either gone or sort of significantly changed. That would be really tough.
Brian, it is pretty clear that your passion is in the core of the geology, and I'm so glad we have you in here. Do you have other passions unrelated to geology?
Yeah, I mean, I used to play music. I used to play drums. I never was like sort of really properly trained. I just sort of picked it up in college and started playing with friends, and was in a few different bands. Some of them more like kind of cover bands playing in bars or parties, and then another band that did have some original songwriting and stuff. But it's been over 10 years since I actually sat down behind a drum set. So I obviously still like listening to music and think about it a lot. And every once in a while entertain the idea of getting back into it, but then, get sucked back into all the other stuff going on. So, I guess that's still, a passion.
And more in general, what do you doubt most? What are your doubts?
I guess my ideas or abilities are good enough, I guess, basically.
Oh, you suffer the imposter syndrome.
I guess so. I mean, I guess I'm not exactly sure, what the definition of that is. But, people use that in sort of different ways. But I guess, being a scientist, especially writing proposals where it's very competitive, right? You get rejected a lot. So I guess you kind of get used to it, but it's basically people saying, "Oh, yeah, that's not good enough." So you end up doubting whether or not you can come up with the ideas that make a difference. So those are definitely doubts I have all the time. Try to work through it and not let it really like totally beat you down. But it's part of doing this.
What illusion do you suffer from?
Delusion?
Illusion.
Oh, illusion. Illusion. I guess maybe can you just say a little more about that? Like sort of an example?
Yeah, what do you think? Sometimes, we live our life and we think that, I don't know, we are important, that people, they love us, that we are indispensable. That's an illusion.
Yeah, I guess, no, I don't think I'm indispensable. Yeah, I don't know. An illusion.
Well, you probably don't have any.
Or maybe I just haven't thought about it. You're asking really probing questions in a good way. And I hadn't really, I guess self-evaluated, sort of that kind of thing, doubts and illusions.
So let's do it the other way around. What is the question that you would most like to ask to your students? You have a lot of students, and you poke them a lot. So what is the question that you like to ask them a lot?
That I like to ask them a lot. Well, I guess I probably do the annoying kind of professor advisor thing where I'm like, well, what do you think? Right? Sort of put it back on them, right? When they sort of ask a question.
Well, that's very risky, right? Because they could say, oh, this is BS.
Yeah, right. That's right.
You're in a position where asking a question like that is not neutral. You know that they can come back with that.
They can.
That kind of answer.
I think they might be cautious about that because they realize that what I'm doing is trying to get the discussion going, right? So they could answer it in a way to stop that, but then they didn't really get what they came for, right? With some help or some insight. So, I do that a lot, right? I think we all do that. Somebody say, well, what about this? What about that? And be like, yeah, that's interesting.
Do you do it? Do you ask the same question to your peers?
I think so. I hope so.
That would put you in a neutral position.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a good point. Do I do that to my peers? I guess with contemporaries, yeah, there's questions asked, but there's also where we say, well, here's what I found out, right? I'm going to tell you straight up, right? We did this analysis or did this study. Here's what we found. Sort of the implication of like, what do you think about that? How does that square with what you're saying right now?
Brian, here's a list of activities that you do in your daily work. I'll tell you like a list. I would like you to give a grade to their importance from 1 to 10.
Okay.
And a short comment if you want. Like how important it is, 1 to 10, to be first author in a paper.
Oh, 3 or 4.
What about the...
Because, well, the little bit more detail with that is because I have tenure.
I see. Very good. Very, very interesting. So that means that before it would have been way higher.
I think so. I mean, depending on how many you have, but there's certain expectations that are the reality, right?
So being first author is not about the ego of showing up an idea and you being the first author. It's more about a tool that you use to get the job.
Yeah, well, I'm certain. I mean, there's ego everywhere, right? It's certainly there. I don't want to imply or say that I'm egoless for sure, but I guess now in this position, right? I get more excited about seeing students or former students as the first author.
What about...
Maybe not more excited. It's just different. I get excited about it.
Yes.
I still get excited if I'm the lead author. But I'd say that the papers or projects where that would be the case right now are always on the back burner, right? Because the projects and papers that involve students are always more urgent because they need to finish, right? Where the paper that me and collaborators I worked with for years, that sort of languishing there, gets a little work done and then it sits around for many months again, and those just don't have the urgency that the papers led by students or former students, recently graduated students have.
But again, this goes back to the context, because if the students, they are not really interested in remaining in academia, then fighting to be first author or struggling to be first author is not that important, and that in turn is related to what you would like your students to do.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I just had this discussion recently with some collaborators who sort of are aligned with me on this, that even if a master's student is finished, say, 5 years ago, and has moved on, and is not interested in getting this piece of science kind of over the finish line for paper, but they are still first author because it wouldn't have happened without the work they put in, right? The data
this
they
is
collected.
Recognition, which is a fundamental element to allow the world to spin.
And I'd say, at least for my department and other departments potentially, that for evaluating how successful a faculty is, it's not just first author. Equally, in some cases, is having their primary advisees as first author, because that's your group, right? You're cultivating sort of new scientists, getting their ideas out there. So I wouldn't want to paint the picture that it's only about the professor having first author, at least here, right? So I can't speak to other places. So, but I think that's a good thing about where I am, is there's a lot of value put on the primary advisees leading work.
What about the importance of the impact factor of the journal where you publish?
It has little to no, I think, bearing. I mean, there's so many journals now. I think just it kind of comes down to is it a legit journal? It's not something that's really sort of sketchy, sort of journal that was made up on the internet, and there's no actual people involved, right? You've heard all these kind of these kind of scams, right? That it's a legit, journal with good people, scientists as part of the editorial board or staff. That so I got involved. Dave Hodgson, is the chief editor of this Frontiers sedimentology journal, and he was really smart about this, because there's so many journals. Like, oh my God, another new one. Like, there's so much to read. There's so many journals, but he wanted to gather a group of people to really help communicate, that this isn't some kind of random thing. We'd like to, make this work. So I think that was really smart.
So if first author has, you gave a grade of 3, what about the impact factor? Even less?
Yeah, 0.1.
What about being a session chair?
Session chair, that's different. It's hard to, importance of that. I don't know about importance of that so much, but I like doing it because, I like kind of meeting speakers and being involved. So I guess just, I like doing it. I don't know how to rank that one.
So if your students, they are listening to you, or students in general, and they say, when you're tenure first author is a 3, session chair would be more important or less?
Well, I guess let me clarify. My ranking of 3 is now, right? Like you said, in my second year here, I probably would have, put the importance of first author more up at 7 or 8.
Yeah, so with that view, is important to be session chairs, or is important maybe for public relationships, or? Yeah,
I think so. I mean, because you're kind of out there, right? You're part of the community and helping organize. I guess it's hard. It's difficult to really encapsulate sort of the value of that, and I guess sort of evaluating people's success. But I think it's important.
What about something similar but different. So being invited for presentations and lectures to other universities.
Yeah, that I'd say compared to being session chair, that's typically sort of viewed as sort of more significant, right? Because people are reaching out, saying, we want you to come kind of share what you do with us.
What about something similar, which is being a keynote speaker? So they're also reaching out, but from a conference rather than from a university.
Yeah, sure. A keynote, especially, in a maybe a smaller research conference, maybe as 100 or 200 people, where everyone, plenary style, where everyone goes to, the keynote. That typically is viewed as I've never had that experience. I mean, I did the lecture kind of series, but that's different than a keynote at a conference.
So
I guess I don't know. I don't see as many keynotes happening, as time goes on, or maybe they're just not called keynote. I don't know. Just sort of sessions will have an invited speaker, right?
Yes, yeah, that was a fashion probably for a few years ago. But give us a grade.
Oh gosh.
This everything. The importance of giving a grade is to understand for you relatively what is more or less important.
Yeah. Being invited as keynote, I guess it would be moderate importance. So I guess middle of the road. Yeah.
Okay. And what about these things about awards and honors that is always written in the American curriculum? How important is to chase an award and an honor? So doing it on purpose.
Yeah. So, right. Well, I mean, I guess sort of in the academic sense, getting nominated for an award is typically not something the person necessarily specifically chases, right? That collaborators or peers sort of push that nomination.
Yeah, I think I was thinking more about like the best paper, the best poster, where there's an award and you can go through the guidelines to try to satisfy all of them.
Yeah, I honestly don't think about that too much in terms of best paper, best poster.
But that is something
I would love it
typical,
if it happened.
Right?
Of course, I'd be proud of that. But I guess I don't think of that when I'm writing and submitting paper.
What about being part of a scientific panel, like in scientific panel of IODP in your case?
Yeah, so I was able to do that for 3 years, 2013 to 2016, and that was super fun. I really enjoyed that. Hopefully, I get to do that again.
So would you suggest to do it again to other people?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you end up getting to meet a lot of people and learning a lot of different science and how people approach their science. And I guess for me, when I sat on that panel, was after I went to see the first time, and so it was really good timing for me. Like really excited. Right? I was like, oh, this is awesome, And so I got involved in that panel, which got me kind of involved in that community and just getting to know people, and so that was really, really key for me, because then I got involved in helping write a proposal for new drilling, and so I got to see how the process worked. And this is similar advice people will say for those that seek funding from NSF is it's good to go kind of sit on one of the review panels.
And you understand the intricacies of the paperwork and the bureaucracy.
And not just the mechanics and logistics of it, although that has huge value, right? You kind of understand the inner workings, but even getting I guess networking, if you like,
and being exposed to the culture of that panel.
Yeah, and I think it helps maybe even subconsciously or sort of unconsciously sort of seep into you, but what that community is like, and how to participate in it.
Brian, how important is to be a reviewer?
I say really important. In this, I'm having a hard time giving you the 1 to 10 score. I know, so it's probably annoying, but I think it's really important because we all write papers and want them to be fairly and thoroughly reviewed, right? So we have to do that ourselves to give back in a way, right? Sort of part of the service of it all. And also, you learn a lot, right, by reading the newest stuff and really participating in the dissemination of that whole process. So I think, the whole peer review, it's not perfect. There's a lot of discussion about making it better as it should. We should always keep trying to improve it, but it is sort of the best system we have for doing this.
And last, how important it is to tweet?
How important to tweet? Probably not super important, but I still like doing it. I mean, Twitter, I guess we could have a whole another hour discussion about that.
Exactly. Let's remember to the audience that you tweet a lot. You have like 25,000 tweets, and you have more than 6,000 followers in Twitter.
Well, so the secret to that is I started in 2009, right? So the only secret to having lots of followers is you do it for a long time.
Oh, is that the secret?
Yeah, basically.
Do you feel the responsibility to whatever you write is going to be read potentially by 6,000 people?
Yes, and I'd say more often than not. Maybe not every single time that thought goes through my head, but the majority of the time, I'll be like, right. So I think somebody said this or wrote this. I can't remember who or where, but it'd be like, if you having like a megaphone, right, out on the street. It's not exactly like this, but you're saying something to a whole bunch of people. So, but at the same time, one of the things people like about Twitter is there's a casualness to it as well, right?
So do you do it more for yourself or for your audience, the things that you write?
I think for myself. I do a fair amount of I suppose promotion, self-promotion, or my research group promotion. Like I said, I think it's academic science Twitter is good for sharing. Like, hey, we have this new paper out. Check it out. And I like when people do that because I find out stuff. It's hard to keep up. There's so many papers, and I'm interested in different things. So I find out actually when new papers come out, whether it's through the journal feed or more likely other scientists, whether it's theirs or somebody else's. They're like, oh, look, this looks interesting. So I try to contribute to that by not just my own stuff, but saying, hey, look at this new paper. This is kind of cool.
Brian, it's probably the longest interview ever. I have so many more questions to you, but I can't let you go before asking you to explain us your change from industry when you were working at the research lab at Chevron to academia. What did you feel when that happened? Was it that maybe a dream you had before becoming a professor? Were you in a way like hiding in the industry and you were thinking about there, or is it completely different?
Good question. So, when I did my master's, Colorado School of Mines, I was like, all right, I'm going to go into industry, get a job. And then I got really into it, and so I was like, oh, maybe I'll look into a PhD. So I did that. But even during my PhD, it wasn't until towards the end, like the last year or half year even, that I started seriously entertaining sort of being an academic. Most of that time, I figured I'd sort of follow that path as maybe more on the research focus part of industry geoscience, which is where I ended up at Chevron, right? It was like a research or technology kind of team. But it was all during that. I did that for 3.5 years. All during that I was applying to academic jobs. I wasn't applying to every and any job out there because it was a good job. I liked my teammates and I liked doing it, but I also just had this thought, like, I don't know if I want to do this for my entire career. So I started applying to certain positions, and this fit here worked out, fortunately for me. So I don't know. It's hard to place any single moment, I guess, because I was kind of pursuing it in my head the entire time. At the same time, thinking if it doesn't work out, it's okay, right? Like it wasn't, I was lucky in that sense that it was a good job, and I was interested enough in it and satisfied enough in it. But I was looking ahead, right? Sort of trying to have some foresight. Like, am I going to be satisfied with this in 5, 10, 20 years? And so I think that's what drove me to explore.
And I think that we really understand that you are satisfied right now.
Yes, I definitely am. I feel fortunate and privileged to be able to do this. Well,
thank you, Brian. We were in conversation with Brian Romans, Associate Professor of Sedimentary Geosciences at the Virginia Tech, and I really enjoyed talking with you, Brian, and showing the human side of you being a scientist, a geoscientist. I think that the audience, the students, other professors, and professionals in general would really appreciate that. It's something that is difficult to write in a paper, it's difficult to expand in a Facebook page or in a tweet.
Yeah, I think you're right. So yeah, I enjoyed this too. So thanks for inviting me. I'm glad it finally happened after a few years of talking about doing it.
Yeah, I hope we can do another one pretty soon.
Okay, yeah. You know where to find me.
Thank you so much, Brian. This was Mini Geology radio show, KPFT HD3 channel. Goodbye. Bye, Brian.
Bye.